But my reaction to your story is, we shouldn't have treated you that way.
Whoop-de-doo, Ben. Like, that's also my reaction to my story. But trans people have to react to the world as it is today.
My name is Ben Charland, and you're listening to What on Earth is Going On. My guest this week is Lee Airton, assistant professor at Queen's University's Faculty of Education in Kingston, and also the author of Gender Your Guide. Lee's personal pronoun is they, them, and that's a very important part of their work both as an educator and in the writing of this book, the subtitle of which is A Gender-Friendly Primer on What to Know, What to Say, and What to Do in the New Gender Culture. But we get much deeper than that in this conversation. We talk about the current historical moment. We talk about how culture is being crowdsourced. We talk about the so-called meat space versus the digital space that we live in, a term that I'd never heard before. The mobilization of marginalized people and how that can sometimes have unintended effects. The sex ed or sexual education wars in Ontario, the power of learning by proximity and by sharing space. And I also want to mention that this episode is incredibly fun. Now, if you like this show, please give it a rating on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or whatever podcast provider that you use, and go to whatonearthisgoingon.ca to let me know what you think of the show by email or on social media. I really do look forward to hearing from you. Lee Airton, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be with you.
Thanks so much for coming. It's a pleasure to have you. I'm really excited to chat with you. About a year and a half ago, I heard you speak at a What Does It Mean to Be Canadian event at Queen's University. I think it was part of Canada 150, if I remember correctly.
It was. It was also part of the Queen's Reads program where we read a book that touched on the theme of reconciliation. And I was on a panel about that. Yeah,
and I just remember that you were very, not only well-spoken, but almost universally compassionate to everyone in the room. Anyone who would be listening to you would understand that you were on their side regardless of their station, position, perspective in life. And I thought that was very valuable. And that wasn't to diminish the other panelists, but I think whether it's that you had to make a deliberate effort or you've just been making it so long that it's coming natural to you, compassion seems to be woven into the work that you do. And it's definitely in your book, which is called Gender Your Guide, that's sitting in front of us. And I really appreciated reading this book, just how important the softness of touch and the compassion comes through. And there's actually a quote I wanted to start us off with, which is that you aim to make gender more joyful and less harmful. And I don't hear that enough. So let me just start off by saying thank you for writing the book, and thank you for the work that you do.
That means a lot to me. Thank you.
So you got the first question. And it's always the same, and it's a pretty big one, so no pressure. But Lee, what on earth is going on?
You know, I like your question because it makes me think about bigger things that are going on in our particular historical moment that my book tries to speak to. And I think that what's going on is that we're losing the ability to understand that we are implicated in other people's suffering. So what I try to do in all of my work kind of gets at what you talked about with that panel, gets at the book, is I just really try to let people know that the stuff that's going on in the lives of people who are very different from them is actually just a different flavor of the stuff that happens in their own lives. But it's all about how we notice how these larger structures like gender, like colonialism, like racism, I mean, they affect everybody in really terrible ways and very differently. But they're all a flavor of each other. So that's what I try to do. And you can't have compassion for people without giving them a foothold into the topic and saying, actually, these are some things that are probably happening to you. And I, this non-binary trans person, I am sorry those things are happening to you. Right? So let's learn a little bit more, and then we can probably reciprocate that feeling too.
Have we always been implicated in the suffering of others, or do you think that that's a new phenomenon?
Well, I'm very careful with my work to speak to the current sort of historical moment. I think context is very important. I think that because of because of, like, for so many reasons, because of how we have to, like, produce an image of ourselves to participate in the workforce, in our jobs, in our lives, with social media, with all these things. We're all sort of hyper aware of producing a certain kind of representation of ourselves for other people to consume. I think that we're more vulnerable to the impact of things like gender norms. Right, like this, you don't just get a haircut. You look on the internet to see what haircuts people have. Right, you don't just buy a birthday present for your kid to take to their friend's birthday party. Like, you look on Facebook and you ask around and you kind of crowdsource this stuff, which is all a way of trying to make our behaviors conform more with these larger structures. So I think there's always been gender, and there's always been ways that people are divided in categorical means, even though those look different across different historical moments. But I think that right now, because of our sort of way that we integrate with technology and with representation, we're onboarding more of that work ourselves. And that is it just has terrible impacts on people.
There's so much information, and we're also so much more sensitive to it by virtue of the technology that we have, the context of the historical moment that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think that even if we were implicated in the suffering of others a few hundred years ago, we're more implicated now. We're more in touch now, and therefore we're more responsible now. And there's something you said now that reminded me of a conversation I had on this podcast with Carlos Prado, who's a philosopher here at Queen's University. It was episode number 2, I think. And he said in the middle of the program, "Why do men grow beards, or why do men shave? Why?" Like, it's a really funny question, because it's something that we, of course, take for granted. It's an idea that lives under the surface of daily life. And yet...
Well, except not all men grow beards.
Right. And obviously, there are many things you can do with your facial hair, with your leg hair, with your body hair.
Yeah.
But the question of why do we do certain things to groom ourselves in a certain image, and where does that information come from?
I'm like, how does that sit differently on different kinds of men? And I'm not just talking about transgender men who don't grow beards because their bodies don't produce hair in that way, or don't yet because they might not have begun to a medical transition in some way. I mean, the expectation that, like, a big like sexy man is a man who's big and who has, like, the capacity to grow facial hair, but there's a whole lot of men and boys in this world who, for reasons about their own phenotype, don't grow beards, or they don't grow this kind of full lumbar sexual beard that is very, very sort of fetishized in, like, hipster mainstream pop culture. So when, like, if you think of a school and a whole bunch of boys and girls, because probably there's just boys and girls there in most schools, they're beginning to grow facial hair. Who grows facial hair in a way that is looking like what is normative and what is culturally sort of approved or dominant in that community? And who's not? Right? And that's talking about the ways that our bodies are read into gender categories, and about having compassion for boys who, because maybe their phenotype or genetic background doesn't predispose them to grow that big lumbar sexual beard or anything that looks like it. Yeah. And then there's boys who do. So there's so much pressure on people to conform inside of these boxes, and what trans folks go to is different, but it's not different in a way that means there's no understanding that can be bridged.
This is so interesting, and maybe even ironic, because what the gender revolution is doing, and what your book is doing, and what you're trying to do is to break down some of these boxes so we don't have to be so confined and restricted, not just in ourselves, but for other people that we encounter in life. As you in your campaign have said, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a big deal to use someone else's pronoun that they've selected for themselves. And they won't treat it as a big deal if you don't get it right the first time, or you don't know what it is, or you didn't know to ask, or whatever. And that's something that comes through really clearly in your book, that it's no big deal. But this whole subject of gender in our culture today, this culture war over gender, is a big deal to a lot of people.
Sure.
And I mean, I know that there are a lot of ways to approach this question, but why is that? Is it just we as a culture are holding on to what we think are our traditions, or we're afraid of what's new? Because it's funny that freedom, which is really what we're talking about, the freedom to be respected as who you are, is so hard for some people to accept.
Well, I think I do a lot of... Okay, so when I think about all these big questions, my site that I'm interested in is actually relationships, right? Is how people react when people walk into a room. how people interact with each other, how they talk to each other. That is something that I'm very interested in. And what I often find teaching, researching, what have you, is that when you say things like this culture war, like that culture war is an abstraction. So I know that there are terrible, terrible places on the internet, and people who are dedicated to kind of trying to mainstream the things that are fomented in those terrible places. I know there are those terrible places. I know there are groups of people in the real life or in meat space, which is a term I'm learning about.
Meat space?
Yeah, like not in the virtual world, but like in real life, like IRL.
MEAT.
Yeah. So there's people in meat space.
I love that.
I know it's really gross, but whatever, it works. So there's people who have who are also not like, are together and fomenting in a way that is not in favor of people like me being real or being okay. And I know that's true, but if we actually think about where I live and the conditions of my everyday life, I have neighbors, I have coworkers, I have students, I have people I interface with every day, hundreds of people, and we're doing okay. Right? And I always know that I occupy a position of tremendous privilege. I understand that. That's true. But I also know this isn't only me who's saying this, right? There's nobody who has a perfect life. There are very few trans people who use non-binary pronouns like they, them, or whose pronouns aren't like the first ones that a person's gut would tell them to use when they saw them. There's tremendous diversity there. And there's not really anybody who who goes around feeling perfectly recognized by everybody in their life, right? But almost all of us have these pockets where we're doing okay, and those pockets just keep getting bigger. So when people say things like, what's with this culture war? I'm like, okay, so there are pockets that are really terrible, and there's sometimes those things spike into the discourse, but the fact is that this is unstoppable. And it's unstoppable because people are learning that, oh, actually, like your neighbor or your coworker is a non-binary person. And yeah, sometimes it takes practice to change your language, or yeah, your coworker is a trans person and they're transitioning or they're whatever. And like, it takes some time, but you can't stop people learning that actually it's no big deal.
Yeah, and one thing you talk about as a core principle in the book, is that you can treat gender as a fact, but you can also treat it as a process.
Sure.
And it's probably more correct to see it as a process, because my gender today may change in 20 years.
Sure.
I may not. Why do I have to be categorized by who I am now in 2019 as Ben, and you as Lee in 2019, that there's not just fluidity in terms of gender fluidity, some people identify as such, but it's like sexuality. There's a spectrum, and it's possible to change, and in fact, change should be welcome.
Sure.
In the same way, and this is something that comes up a lot in this podcast, is when it comes to politics, we seem to really get angry, this larger cultural idea, when someone changes their mind. When a politician flip-flops, we call it, and we get angry because we think of them as a hypocrite.
It's terrible.
Well, it's terrible because thinking is a process, philosophy is a process, politics is a process, and gender is a process. This conversation is a process of learning and discovery and change. And I think if we were to hive that off and put that in a silo, we're missing out on what it means, I think, to live.
Sure. I mean, there's very little anti sort of gender and sexual diversity in particular, but there's very little that like arguments or discourses or movements that are anti that being an okay and real thing. There's very little content there that is not just basic traditional conservative values. There's very little, and it's difficult because that's another kind of binary that pops up, is that like there's those people of traditional conservative values and there's these people over here, but all of these people actually want to participate, well, for the most part, want to participate in social life with other people. They want to do work that is meaningful, and work, I'm not necessarily just saying remunerated work, but they want to participate and live in a safe and good way with the people around them. So there's a lot of work, just because people tend to do a lot of posturing and have like opinions and pithy stances about gender stuff. If you just really scratch away at that, it's either I'm uncomfortable because I don't know what to say when I talk about you, and that makes me uncomfortable, so I'm going to try to sound intellectual, or it's actually I just think there are men and there are women, and women do this and men do this, and this is what you have to do, and this is what you are.
Close the book, end of story.
Close the book. So I don't think I don't think of myself as having nothing in common with people who have a traditional conservative outlook. I am not a conservative, big P politically at all. But I also think that it's been historically very difficult for, I guess, my movement to speak to people who on the surface are taking a radically different view.
Mm-hmm.
And I am very interested in finding common ground against the actual problem. Let me rephrase. So we have a lot of moments when okay, I'm a teacher educator. I teach Bachelor of Education students. So it's when they go into practicums, they've had experience, that means placements in schools. They actually teach in this room, which is kind of fun. They go out into schools, they've had school experiences of their own, and a lot of them, especially at my university, it's a majority white institution, which is interesting. It's one of the old E with an E universities in Canada. And they tend to parrot this discourse of, oh, well, what if you're in a school with a lot of racialized families who belong to this religion, and they don't want to hear anything, their kids to hear anything about gender and sexual diversity? Like, then what do you do? And so I guess, getting back to your original question, what on earth is going on, is a successful mobilization of people of color is the problem for trans and queer people. So that is hard, because the big problem we all face is a system that doesn't privilege either of our ways of life.
Right.
Right? Like, trans people aren't well done by the sort of the prevailing social order, but neither are many racialized people, right? Neither are people whose faiths are not Judeo-Christian faiths. So what are these moments when your kid is experiencing gender expression-based discrimination for her hijab, or for whatever way in which she is doing gender that's not kind of the normative way? What are ways that discrimination based on gender expression, and what this kid over here is experiencing, who's, male assigned and very feminine, like, how can we all get together to work for school cultures where neither of these kids suffer from this problem?
Right. And that's really fascinating to me, because it's almost a manufactured conflict between two groups of people. I recall, I think it was in 2008 when Barack Obama was elected president, because of the massively increased turnout of black voters in California, Prop 8 was passed, failed to pass, I think, which was to legalize gay marriage, if I'm remembering
Prop
correctly.
8, say no to hate.
Right, and because many black voters in California, and this is just statistics, are religious and traditional and conservative. And there was this cultural moment where one, marginalized group defeated another, and that was the way it was framed. But it's manufactured. There are times, I think, say in the legal system, where, say, the right to freedom of expression is actually in conflict with the right to freedom of religion.
Yeah.
Right? There are many times where these things it's really hard for a judge and a court and a lawyer and for the public to understand which one should take precedent or how we navigate these things, because it's not a case-by-case basis. We have to say this is the rule for everyone, because that's what it means to live in a fair society. We know that these things happen, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is that there are times when it's not necessary, when it's manufactured, when we can do things that respect and give dignity to all people in a room.
It's sort of a well-known fact among folks who do work in relation to gender and sexual diversity in this province, in Ontario, with the sex ed wars and the protests at Queen's Park about the new revamped sex ed curriculum. It's kind of a truism among those of us who do work in that area that the buses that brought a lot of folks of color down from the northern suburbs were funded by evangelical Christian groups that are mostly, if not majority, white. So it's funny, it's slippery to get that's like a thing that, people know and then they shared. So it's like weird information, but there's definitely ways, whether it's in discourse, in the ways that faith can get mobilized to mean, let's bring this marginalized group into the fight against this marginalized group. There's a lot of complicated stuff going on. And so what I really just try to do is to find common cause and to show up in ways that people don't expect. right? Like it's so powerful to be this person, like with this gender identity, walking around being like, yep, this is my deal in the world, and to be in a good way with other people who think that I'm going to hate their guts. Like that's really cool. I love those moments of like, oh, actually this is fine.
It's maybe not a good expression, but kill them with kindness in a way. Pretty
much. And it's not even much labor. It's just like, it's fine.
I respect you. Is it so hard for you to respect me?
Or just like, we have a job to do. Let's do the job together. It's fine. Right? Like there's so much power in people who are in proximity to each other, like in a community or a neighborhood or a town or a city, just being together and sharing space in a common cause. There's this really like hilarious, well, I guess it's hilarious in some ways, but it's this, there's a movement called Gays and Lesbians Support the Miners.
Okay.
And this was
miners with an E, like
coal miners. Yeah. And this happened during I think, and one of your listeners will probably chime in and be like, everything you say is wrong, which is fine, but
don't worry about that.
Right. It was I think my family has roots in Yorkshire and in Leeds. My dad's side were coal miners for a very long time. And it kind of took place in a mining town in Yorkshire, and there is a issue of a mine closure, or there's consequences of like austerity, and the miners were just like out of work. I think it was a strike actually. They're out of work and they're not doing so hot, and so this gay guy, in a city, created all these events and benefit concerts to raise money for the miners. Because he heard about what was happening, and then he went up there with a bunch of other gay people, and they tried to give the money to the community. And this was in the 80s. Like this was a very different time. And it was a struggle, but the story we have of it is that these people, these very sort of small town, like conservative people in Yorkshire in the United Kingdom, these miners, they eventually formed relationships. And I believe it's true to say they came and marched or did some sort of solidarity action with the gay people in London. So just being in space and working together on things is so important, because we don't have enough in-person contact with people who are very different anymore. And I think that's like my big answer to what's going on.
There's I don't know if you know, he's a moral psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, and he wrote a book called The Righteous Mind, and he's got a new one called The Coddling of the American Mind. And some of the things that he argues is about essentially tribalism, and the reason that we believe certain things is because our group believes them. And there's other statistics that come out that say 90% to 95% of your economic behavior, the things you buy, the things you look at when you go shopping, the things you consume, is based on, that 95% of your behavior is economical, and it's based on your group. It's based on what your group does, and it's based on signaling your position in your society to other people. And it's all subconscious. You're not going around, I'm going to buy a Snickers bar instead of a Mars bar, because that's my group. All
people's clothing shopping, the first thing most people do without thinking is they go to one side of the store or the other.
Right.
This sounds like somebody did a lot of macro work to mainstream what folks in gender studies have been saying in the gender category for a very, very long time.
Totally. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because if I believe the things I believe because of my group or my tribe, then it's both really hard and really easy to change my mind.
Change the tribe's mind.
Right, change the tribe's mind. Yeah. But until you do, I'm going to resist whatever you say, because it doesn't matter what rational argument you give. My group believes this, and that's not what I'm thinking. That the top surface of my mind is going, yeah, but you're just wrong.
But your belonging is more important to you than your own rational thought process.
And the idea is that for the vast majority of people, belonging is more important than any rational thought or argument. Now, it's fun because as a professor, belonging means to inquire. Belonging means to be skeptical. And therefore, you can say or do not anything, but you can kind of go out there and be inquisitive about something that no one else is, and that is what it means to be an academic.
You can, but inquiry is very domesticated in many disciplines into this is what knowledge is, and this is what it means to produce it, and these are the steps you go about producing it, and this is how you validate it and verify it's true, and then this is where you put it. So,
and you've actually spoken out, not against that, but you've reframed that a little bit in your book.
Have I?
Yeah, there's a quote in your book that right at the beginning you say, "I do not believe that knowledge is a single author proposition."
Yeah, for sure. Yes, I did. I thought, yeah, that's in the preface to the book. That's actually in the acknowledgments of the book.
It is,
because part of something that greatly influences my scholarship and my activism, my educational work, is learning from and very gratefully receiving different kinds of teachings from Indigenous people on the various lands in which I have lived on in the course of my life. And I just have come to believe that there is very, very little that I know that is not knowledge I hold in a relationship with other people.
Right.
That has been produced and enriched and lived through my relationships with other folks, whether it's like other trans people. I am a repository of what I have learned from being in community with other people.
Well, and furthermore, the things you know may only be known by other people or in other things that we think we. So there's a book called. Sorry, I keep.
Yeah, you have a lot of book name dropping.
Sorry, I'm not trying to name drop or
no,
book drop.
No, it's cool. I wish I could do that. And with the ease and the grace of which you do.
I'm just faking it. I'm just making it all up. No, there's a book I did.
So authors of books Ben talks about, please write in if Ben is mischaracterizing your books.
Yeah, actually,
he's done a great job of mine. I think you read it. And
but I'm going to make up this book and pull it out of my ass. No, this one's called.
What? Everything I'm about to say is true. It's not by me.
Yeah, no, it's a book called The Knowledge Illusion, and so I actually did a podcast about this book, and someone else read it, so it's real. I promise. And the premise of the book is that we think and know collectively.
Sure.
And that you think, and the knowledge illusion is where you think you know something that you really don't know. But we collectively have the knowledge. So a zipper. If you ask most people, how does a zipper work? And on a scale of 1 to 7, how confident are you that you know how a zipper works? And they'll say 4 or 5, usually, maybe 6.
This reminds me actually of why people get really, why people can become quite indignant about new ways or actually old re-emerging ways that people are living gender, and you poke at those things and they totally fall apart.
Right, because they don't actually. Yeah,
no.
Exactly.
So people know I say in the book, people know a lot about what it means to live as a person of their gender in their local community.
In fact, you say they're experts.
They're experts, right? They know exactly what it means to show up and be a boy and be recognized as a boy in the schoolyard. If you dig a little deeper, that also means that this boy I'm talking about knows exactly what he could do to not show up and be recognized and engaged as a boy in that schoolyard. He knows what it would be like to basically situate himself outside of that safe circle of safety that comes from being easily recognized. And that's the leap that the book tries to make. I say it's a book about gender. It's not a book about trans people. It's a book about gender because everybody who reads this book, if they don't just go to the Understanding the Trans Spectrum chapter, which is chapter 3, but if they read the book through, they can't help, if I've done my job right, they can't help but learn what they know about gender, even if they've been a very gender-conforming person their entire life. What would it be like if you didn't do XYZ before you went to your church or to your workplace or to your school? What would happen to you? And situating those imagined bad happenings as things that actually do happen to other people for whom those things are important and they can't avoid them. But also just beginning to realize that you can get out ahead of some of the bad things that are going to happen to other people.
And so much of this is already coded in us.
Sure.
We know
carry it with us like a backpack.
Yeah, and a child, from the moment that they're born, and I've heard this from others, but it's also in your book, that you're gendered almost immediately. The way that the nurse reacts to you coming out of the womb.
Your genitals.
Is a gendered reaction, and that is going to have an impact.
The way we hold newborn babies, the degree to which we jostle them, the tone that we use to speak to them, whether we throw them, well, like I said, jostling, but whether we sort of put them on our shoulders or in our arms or how we hand them to other people. There's so many variables. We've only scratched the surface of the ways that our cultural repertoire of boyness and girlness and masculinity and femininity, there's so many ways we enact that we don't have a clue what we're doing. But because the child themselves can't speak and identify who they are, we think that they haven't begun the process of socialization. They're just a boy or they're just a girl.
Right, but of course they have. That's what it means to be human.
The way we play with our kids, from the way we acknowledge their attention, the way that people attribute gender to the cry of a newborn baby. Like, oh, what a strong crier. We just saw a penis. They're like, oh, she's got such a beautiful voice. We just saw a vulva.
Yeah.
Right? So it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And
Nobody is outside of it.
I really appreciated how Lee opened up our conversation by saying that we are implicated in other people's suffering. That's a very important idea that I think underpins a lot of our conversation and a lot of Lee's work. Now, coming up in this episode, Lee talks about their decision to visit the doctor one day on a weekday at 10 or 11 a.m. and why they shouldn't have done that. Now, this sounds like a prosaic story, but it actually has profound meaning, and it gets to a bit of a debate between Lee and I that I think both of us learned a lot from. All that's coming up on this episode of What on Earth is Going On. Well, it's impossible to be because it's in our language. It's in the way I think the language is one of the biggest ones, because in English anyways, you cannot really speak until you've learned to do so in a non-gendered way. And in French, for example, is obviously a lot harder.
Do me a favor. Every time I talk about this, we talk about French. Lee, do me a favor.
Yeah.
I swear to God, I'm talking about French in my life.
Sure.
I speak French. I'm talking about it. But let me not have to have the French is gendered conversation, because it is. And there's people who are working really hard to take care of that. And I don't have much to say about it other than yes.
I wasn't going there.
I know, but people always want to talk about it. Always, always, always. And I don't mind. But like at this point, my response is yes, it is very challenging. And there are practical challenges in places like schools that are governed by like human rights legislation that assure gender expression protections to kids, but they're in a francophone school. So like, how are you going to manage that?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a problem. But anyway, sorry to do my tangent.
No, I love tangents.
Every time I talk in public, people want to talk about French. I'm like,
really?
Yes, correct. Well, because we all have people who grew up in Canada, and most of my work is in Canada. We had to learn French, and like we had that. Like nobody who's learned French in high school or elementary school hasn't had the moment of like, oh, this table is a woman.
Right.
So that's how little Anglophone kids get a kick out of French classes is this silliness. So people can't not.
Well, it's almost a first reference point. Like it's the first thing I think of when I think of. I mean, I did reference it when I think about gender and language. French is on my mind. I mean, I have a French name. I have French background, and French comes to me.
Charlon.
Benoit.
It's Benoit.
Yes, Benoit.
Benoit Charlon.
Yeah.
Are you Benoit?
I'm Benoit. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
It's not how you introduce yourself.
No,
to me.
I'm just a Ben. I'm a flat, boring Ben.
Are you Ben Charland?
Yeah.
Oh,
and my English is Ben Charland. I even go Charland because if I go Charland, then people spell it wrong. So I say
Charland.
Ben Charland with a C, Charland. And I'm getting married this summer. And I've been training my future wife because she wants to take the name.
Oh, you should just take hers and make it easier for everybody. Just kidding.
We might. The first three letters of our last names are the same. CHA.
What's her last? Can
Chapel,
you say that?
Chapel.
So you could just make a new one. You call it Charpeland.
Charpeland. I've thought about this. This is an authentic question.
Charpeland.
Not to goof around. I've thought we have these double-barreled last names.
Sure.
Robertson. Davies, which is
that's
not
that's a person's entire name.
But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, like Smith Jessup.
Why not combine them? Do you think that's I mean,
Smith
I don't know.
Jessup?
This is just a goofy question, but why not combine them like you just suggested?
Well, I do have some friends who've made. I do know some folks who've taken. Okay, well, here's your name, here's my name, and they've made what literary people call a portmanteau, which is a word that's a combination of two words like grapple. Those apples that have gone away, but they are allegedly grape apples, and they came in a little clamshell in the apple area of the store. They're gone. Where are the grapples? Can someone write in and tell us where the grapples went?
What on earth is going on with grapples?
Yeah, that's your next podcast.
Yes.
So people, I have heard of people doing that with their last names. The thing that I think is funny, which is happening in my community, because for people of my age group, I was born in the 80s, if we had a hyphenated last name where our parents gave us both their last names, like that was a political statement. Like I grew up in a pretty conservative, upper middle class part of Vancouver, and it was wild to me when one of my friend's mums didn't have the same last name. Like I remember, and this is the wonderful thing about being a child, is I remember my whole body like shutting down when I realized that Mrs. Ricky did not have the same last name as her son Jeffrey.
Your body's shutting down.
Like I remember where I was, and I remember just like being absolute. No, I didn't like go into a coma or anything.
No.
But, like I remember just being absolutely baffled. I remember being absolutely baffled by my a relative of ours came to the house, and her boyfriend had long curly blonde hair, and I was like, I remember I was absolutely baffled. Baffled. I remember the first time I heard the words gay and lesbian. I was at the Vancouver Folk Festival in probably 1988, and there was a guy who was a CBC radio announcer, and he got on the stage, and he was wearing a purple bandana, and he was one of the MCs for the festival evening concerts, and he's like, I am wearing a purple bandana in solidarity with my gay and lesbian friends, and I just stopped, because I was a very literate kid, and I was like, my whole body, it's like, what are you talking about? What do these words mean? So it's pretty wild stuff to just read how steeped you were in this, that was a thing. So there's a point to this, I promise. And it's that kids who had hyphenated last names, those kids are now coming of an age where they're having their own kids. So I got a lot of friends with hyphenated last names. So now what do?
Yeah.
When they're going to give last name to their own kids. So that's the conversation that's happening in a lot of my circles, which is very silly.
No, I don't think it's silly. I've had the same
funny.
thinking. Yeah, and I've had the same thinking. What did two people do when they both have double-barreled last names and they have a kid? Like, do they have four names at that point? And
you got to lose one.
Or
which
two,
parent do you irritate?
Right. Yeah, and I think and it becomes personal. Mm-hmm. But this feeling of bafflement that you just referred to, I want to dig into that for a second, because I wonder how important to that is to you as an educator, as a teacher, and as a learner. The moment of encountering something that is scary, is dangerous, is weird, is out of this world, but is inevitably, unavoidably, undeniably true.
Or at least it's standing right in front of you, and you have an ethical duty to that, to not blow it out of the water.
Right. So how important is this feeling of bafflement to learning, if there is one?
Well, that's what learning is, right? I mean, all the sort of hoary, Hoary, I'm trying to bring that word back, but it doesn't sound good on the radio, but like old theories of learning that we have, like Vygotsky and Erickson. Like, it's all about or Piaget. I'm not so good on that stuff. I don't teach it. Woof. But that you have to sort of be uncomfortable in order to learn.
Right.
Learning is, the best kind of learning happens not completely beyond your comfort zone. You can't have no formation in what you're learning about at all, or else you can't learn. You have to have 1 foot in what you firmly know and 1 foot in the unknown. And that, according to Vygotsky, is called the zone of proximal development. So it's like a hilariously old, normal thing to know about learning. But in terms of my work, what I know is that there's things that we feel very, very entitled to display bafflement about, right? So there's things when I'm sitting in a meeting with my colleagues, and one of them uses a term that I don't know, because they do different kind of research. Usually I'm not very good at math, so usually like a quantitative research term. So, what I do is I'm not sitting there going, I'm not sitting like a fish, baffled, like I was about when I learned about Mrs. Ricky. That's not what's happening for me. That's how I feel.
Right.
But there's an investment I have in not performing that and not letting other people know that I feel that way. So there's aspects of social life where we feel very entitled, but not in a choice. It's not a choice to be. I feel very entitled to show that I'm baffled about that person who just walked into the Dairy Queen, and I don't know if they're man or woman.
I see.
I feel very entitled to be baffled and to display that bafflement for the people around me, because those people are holding hands, or because those people are wearing a thing that is a swimsuit, but I don't think it's a swimsuit. This is a bikini reference. So I feel very, very entitled to do that, and I'm in, just like me with the math. I'm invested in them not knowing I'm baffled. I can claim that now because I've done a lot of studying of this kind of phenomenon. And a lot of teaching with it, but there's also an investment in being baffled, right? So when I'm baffled by something that happens and I display it, there's an investment in making it known that I'm baffled.
I'm so glad that you brought it to this, because that's not what I meant when I asked the question about bafflement, but that's what I should have meant. No, because it's the perfect answer to the question, because it's not what I had in mind, and yet it's revealed something I didn't know about the world.
Cool.
And I appreciate that, but I wanted to ask you, and it's kind of a personal question, but do you still personally experience this kind of bafflement on the part of others when you walk into a Dairy Queen?
Well, I might, you know what? It's hot. I'm feeling some Dairy Queen today, so I might try that out.
Okay.
But here's the problem in Kingston. You can't walk into the Dairy Queen because the Dairy Queen is a drive-through little hut.
Oh, the one on Princess
right.
Street. Yeah.
So I can't, on Division, I can't unfortunately test this theory, but I'm going to work it out. So if we broaden a little away from the Dairy Queen.
Yeah. Booster Juice.
Booster Juice. Oh, man. No, they're in malls. They're just stands in malls. They're not standalone businesses.
Okay.
There's not
McDonald's,
as much of a, I'm going to enter.
Right.
So, well, what's interesting is, sometimes I do. But what I can tell you is, being a person who is this person for many years now, is if I had the foresight to have some kind of system of tracking this, I'm pretty sure what I would see is that the reception I receive when I go into places where people are just kind of waiting around, so they're more interested in finding something to seize upon and be baffled by, the reactions I have are becoming more and more meh as the year goes on.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. So it's becoming more there's less of a ugh. So, but I also, not only do I know that's receding, and I take that as a sign, that and other information I have from other people, and also just from what we know about social change, I take that information in a hopeful register. I'm hopeful about that. But I also use that information, and this is something I try to impress on my reader about this expertise of that trans people also have. I use that to guide how I occupy public space. So I made a terrible decision month and a half ago, the worst decision ever. So one of the perks of being a prof is your time is pretty unstructured. I have things I have to do, but I do them on my own time. So of course, there's a doctor's appointment at 10 a.m. or 10:30 or 11 a.m. during the day. I'm going to take it, right? Do I have to get blood work after that? Yeah, I do. So I'm going to head over to the life labs, and I'm going to go and give blood for my blood test because it's 11 a.m. And guess what? I don't have to rush back to the office. Prof. But who else is in?
I just want to know that you did a hand gesture with that.
Prof. Yeah, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So what I do is I go into the life labs, and it's just full of old dudes in their 70s because they're retirees and they're sitting there. And they've been having this old dude chat. I walk in, stop. The chat stops. The eyes turn. The body language focuses. The mouths open. Because this is a demographic that is working hard and has a lot of wonderful people, and it's not about that. It's just about lack of familiarity, right? So a bunch of older people who live in this rather smaller city, and I have just walked in there, and everyone's bored. It's the blood lab. Everyone is bored, and board spaces are hard. I should have gone on a weekend because there would be kids and parents.
Would you want to have gone on a
yes,
weekend? No. But I mean, if that wasn't in mind, if you weren't going to be affected by the way people, if people weren't going to treat you any differently than anyone else, would you have rather have gone on a weekend, or would you rather go on a weekday?
No, I'd rather go on a weekday.
So then why are you saying you should have done it that way?
Because I am different from you.
Right.
So if I'd gone on the weekend, there would have been kids running around making noise. Parents having conversations with their kids, distraction, not this silent tomb of people who are just having this hushed conversation and there's nothing else going on. There's 3 other people in there. So when I walk in, that's the reaction I get. There's no distraction. There's no noise. I should have gone to a blood lab at a time when it was busy.
Oh, okay. But my reaction to your story is we shouldn't have treated you that way.
Whoop-de-doo, Ben. That's also my reaction to my story. But trans people have to react to the world as it is today.
Right.
In my position of privilege, I have the luxury of behaving as if the world is a little bit easier on people like me than it actually is, because my life is probably, and it's real. My life is probably one of the easiest transgender lives in the world. It's just true. So I have the luxury of living in a way that suggests that generally society is farther than it is, and it is coming. But trans people don't have the luxury of bodying that change into the present in a way that makes ourselves unsafe. We have to trust our guts. And so it's incumbent upon businesses, workplaces, doctors' offices, schools to signpost that this could be better, to tell us before we show up that this could be all right. So maybe we will show up, maybe we will stay in school, we will go to the doctor, we will get our blood drawn, because we are keeping ourselves safe with the presumption that it won't be, because that's what we've had to do for most of our lives.
And that makes perfect sense. My reaction, my emotional reaction to you is not in disagreement, but I'll tell you where my stridency comes from. My mom was a quadriplegic for 40 years. She had me as a quadriplegic, and she died about 10 years ago. And so for, the first 23 years of my life or so, that's the mother that I knew. But the mother that I knew would get very awkward glances from people in the shopping mall, in a doctor's office, wherever we would go. She was a woman in a wheelchair who looked different because she couldn't move her arms and upper body in the way that you and I can. Yeah. And you mentioned something in your book that actually struck true with me.
I'm seeing why you like my book so much.
I think it's part of it, but I'm interested in the historical context of the moment too. But there was something in the book where you say that we know when you make a covert second look.
Oh yeah.
We know. We can see it. You can try to hide it as much as you want. Pull up your magazine and then try to get the second look and just don't do it, because we know. And it was the same with my mom. Mm-hmm. We would be in a shopping mall and you could just tell that people would pretend not to look, and then they'd pass you and then they'd look behind them or whatever. Right. And you could just tell. And my mom was equanimous with it in a way, because it was her life. It was who she was. But she got in a car accident when she was 17. It wasn't what she was born and raised to know.
She remembered something else.
That's right. And she hated being treated differently. She hated going into a doctor's office and being different from anyone else in the room. And her reaction was one of stridency and I dare you to look at me different, because I will bite your head off.
Right on.
And her family, she would go to a bar or something. It was from Alberta, in Edmonton, and she would probably get embarrassed by this, but her sisters and brothers, if someone was staring at them, they would simply turn their faces and stare right back at that person. It was a much more aggressive, entitled, to use the word that you used, way of defending her and getting around. It's probably not something she would ever do on her own. She needed allies in order to do it. But my stridency in my life comes from this sense of, don't you dare treat someone differently because they're different, because we're all different. And I get angry when I hear you say that you can't go into a doctor's office on a weekend or a weekday.
It's just easier if I don't.
I know it's easier if you don't, but it would be easier if my mom didn't go to the bar. It'd be easier if my mom didn't participate in life fully, but she should have participated in life fully, as should you. And and I might be wrong, and I understand that I'm saying something that as a white...
Whatever. No, I don't need you to signpost those things.
You know what
yourself.
I'm saying?
What I hear from what you're saying is, I really appreciate you sharing that with me. And when I said I understand why you like my book so much, is because I want you to, and other people who might read it and resonate with it, I want you to really hold on to that resonance, because this little boy who's going around in everyday life with a mom who's, a quadriplegic and uses a wheelchair, like, you are a person who, and this is in the same kind of framework of my book about owning your expertise around gender, like, you have an expertise that a lot of other people don't have about how disability plays out, and rather how ability is kind of produced by how people react to some bodies and not other bodies, and how that affects people and how people try to manage it. So I think the difference I'm hearing between a person with a disability and someone who has the very precise expertise that you have, which is different but not totally apart from, is that when I think about when I get angry, when I get sad, those wear on me, right? So the decision to not react with anger is not just something I'm doing for other people. I'm also not doing it because it takes a toll on me.
Right.
Whereas, like, it's actually interesting when I talk in here about a moment where if you have a friend who is like super, the heart's in the right place, but the way that they react to people is anger and frustration when they get my pronoun wrong, right? I'm like, you know what? I know your heart's in the right place, but if you know, like, but please don't do that. Because when a person gets to be out of gas and depleted and have these really, and experience and manifest these really difficult feelings about the everyday kinds of oppression they face, then they get to do that, right? If anyone's going to blow up on somebody for getting pronouns wrong, like, it's unfortunate when that happens, but that happens if anyone's going to use up that gas, kind of that reservoir of goodwill in that community, that situation, that gets to be the person who experiences the oppression, not the people who don't, right? So if you have someone who's like pooping on everybody who gets my pronouns wrong, or whoever's pronouns wrong, then if you're like a cis person and a person who's walking beside somebody who has pronouns that are frequently misused, then call in that other person and be like, you know what, can you rein it in? Because our job is to create the path, not alone. Like, we're not doing this for this person, but our job is to help to beat that path for this to be an easier place for this person to be. And you have good intentions, but you're making it harder.
Yeah, and this is something you bring up in the beginning of the book that was really powerful for me, that there's a common misconception that gender and pronoun misusage is all about being offended.
Yeah,
it's actually about exhaustion.
It really is.
And I sense that in the book, and in your answer just now, when you said, it's just, I don't have time and the energy for it, and I'd rather just move on.
Yeah.
And can we all just move on? Mm-hmm. And that was, I think that's important for everyone to hear, because we think that it's this high-level political, manufactured fight, when in fact it's just,
it's everyday.
How would you like it if you were so exhausted? Yeah, everyday interaction.
Right? So when I teach, I have a lot of strong sort of structures that guide how I teach about oppression and how it plays out in everyday life and what teachers need to know and be able to do. So I have a very strong framework that I rest on, and part of that framework is that I don't need you to be able to differentiate cis-normativity and heteronormativity and homonormativity, or heterosexism and homophobia. I don't need you to be like weirdly fluent in this niche language of my discipline and of different spaces that use it. What I actually need you to do is to be able to know that the way that gender and sexual diversity present themselves in your workplace or your life is always going to be a little bit different, because it's always changing. You will always encounter things you didn't know and things you're surprised by. So what I actually need you to do is to know that, and to get ready, because someone is going to walk into your classroom and all you're going to want to do is show them how baffled you are. And this is not your conscious person saying, I want to show you how baffled I am. This is just our unconscious guide letting it out, right? The stop, the orienting of the body, the double take, the gaping, the staring, the way that people who don't ordinarily stammer as part of their speech, but who do in this moment, like that disjuncture and how you react to it. I need you to register that, get it under control really quick, and engage with me like a person who you've known for 10 years just walked into this room. That's what I need you to do. I don't need you to run over and tell me how excited you are that like a trans person has shown up. I don't need you to over affirm. I just need you to do that. It's like, that's a skill that traverses a lot of the areas I teach about. Like, let's say there's a parent-teacher conference and you have a kid, and the parents come in, and one of the parents is like, you didn't expect this kid was a mixed-race kid, right? That happens a lot for teachers. You just didn't know. And the understanding, particularly of a lot of people who are white, is that people don't have mixed-race families, when that's very common. So these parents probably know this is going to happen, and what an incredible relationship-building thing. If they know you don't have a clue, they come in and nothing. Of course this is your parent. And I'm not saying that. I'm showing you that with every aspect of the surface of my body and my affect and my tone of voice.
And it becomes easier the more you do it.
Absolutely. Right? So do you have questions? Yes. Are you learning a heck of a lot about yourself and really way less about other people? Sure. And does that lead you to knowing there's more to know? Sure. And isn't that fun?
You know what? I'm so glad you ended with that, because that's exactly what I was thinking. was that isn't it fun, and I mean this, to de-ossify categories and unlock what it means for other people to be human and other people to be living their full potential, or just being different,
or just like getting a pop.
Yeah, and meeting someone who drinks Dr. Pepper instead of Coke or something. You know, we've had a lot of brands in this conversation.
I know we should get some sponsorship.
That's right.
I feel like you're getting money from these people whose books you talked about. I really want some Dairy Queen coupons.
Yeah, but
your sponsor's Dr. Pepper, so you had to get really in there when I talked about pop. You know, I feel this is happening.
But you brought it all up. I just reacted, so it seems like it's just seamlessly put in. But you also have to remember that the books I referenced are all coming out of my ass, right?
Just bugging you.
So that's the problem there.
You make them yourself.
That's right.
They're made in-house.
They're just as invented as the amount of money I make from the podcast. Okay, Lee, I've got one last thing to do. I've made a list of 10 things before this conversation, and I just want to get your brief, quick, visceral reaction to them as much as you can. And in fact, that was a good reaction right there.
Okay.
This is a new thing. I've just been
on this list?
Well, you're going to find out really shortly.
Okay. Wait, let's have a 5-second pause so in case we need to do it again. You can just edit it. Ready?
Sure.
Not 5, just 2.
Yeah.
Great. And now you can just redo it if you have to redo it.
To redo what?
Like if we have to redo this whole 10 things and I respond.
Why would I have to redo it?
I don't know, but you never know. It's good to be prepared.
But we could have done the redoing pause throughout the entire conversation.
Okay, let's do it again.
Okay. Was that just to make me laugh? I'm sitting there.
No, it's to make myself laugh. But I'm glad you're laughing.
I am, because I sat there for the 2 seconds like, what are we doing? So, okay. So the 10 things. And the thing I say to people with this one is brevity is a gift, which is something my mom would tell me. Brevity is a gift.
She's right.
But, first one. Globalization.
Overused.
Privacy.
Important.
What, you seem ambivalent though,
Well, these are very large things.
Yeah.
I mean, privacy is important. It's a thing that a lot of people take for granted that they have, and they don't realize that a lot of their demands on other people is to violate their privacy.
The next one is Dr. Pepper. No, I'm just joking.
Delicious.
The third one is another big word, technology.
A distraction.
Identity.
Overused.
Identity politics.
Important, but not as important as a lot of other things.
What is identity politics?
Well, that's actually a very good question, because I, as an academic, I have a theoretically informed idea of identity politics but how that phrase is thrown around right now in particularly right-leaning media has nothing to do with what we actually know what it is. So it's actually funny because people who throw that around whenever anyone says anything about race, class, or gender, or sexuality, or trans people, or pronouns, whenever anyone says, oh, that's just identity politics, the irony is that they are participating in identity politics by saying identity politics.
Yeah, you hear that all the time. And honestly, I don't mean to, it's not backpedaling. I did actually, the reason I put that in there is because I think it's such a loaded and bifurcated term.
Sure.
That has, that
it's like
doesn't
the
really mean
culture
anything
war.
anymore.
What does that actually mean?
What does that actually mean? Yeah.
So I don't think identity politics is, I think it's, when I think of it as largely a discourse and conversation-based struggle around representation and words. And I think that's important, but I think what's more important in terms of the way I think about my work is what I've talked about this whole time, but interaction and relationship.
Right. I'm glad you phrased it that way, that it's actually, because it allows us to get out of ourself and see a relationship, which we sometimes forget, I think.
Yeah.
Next
also
word.
To get out of language and be like, actually, we're just sitting in this room and it's fine.
Yeah. It's a dialogue.
Sure.
And it's not much more
we're
complicated.
We're just having a pop. Yeah.
A Dr. Pepper. Next one is artificial intelligence.
The death of everything. I am a science fiction person. I am a Grey Goo scenario devotee. I am not in favor. You know how that when Facebook made an algorithm moderate posts instead of people.
Right.
That's when it all started to go downhill.
Do you think we're living in a dangerous time?
Absolutely. The reason why my work is so focused on like interpersonal and local practices and making like micro political change is because I am so disheartened by partisanship and the impact of algorithmic decision making on how we interact in these forums that are becoming a proxy for real relationships. So I think that I just think it's very, very dangerous.
Yeah, it's a conversation that occurs a lot on this podcast because it's so present, and it seems like there are parts of daily life and parts of our language and parts of ourselves that are being hived off into.
Oh yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
And what I will say is I'm hopeful about that for one reason. Facebook is now for old people.
Right.
So the idea that, and when I, like it used to be when I was I was always an older person in my gender identity affinity community. Like I'm always an old non-binary person. But when I was younger, Tumblr was where you went. Tumblr is an online microblogging platform where you can share whatever, and people form these vast networks of just sharing stuff and sharing resources and sharing jokes and memes and things like that. That's where all the like diverse trans kids were. I talk to trans kids now. They're like, no, Tumblr's terrible. That's where they come to get us.
Huh.
So what I'm noticing is this ennui among young queer and trans people about technology. And I'm also pretty sure that a lot of the people who are getting their jollies on sounding off politically about Facebook are not young people. So I actually do have hope that this current spike in terribleness that's driven by social media, I do think that is a moment in time, and I do think it will wane.
Well, as we've talked about and is in your book, it's a process.
Yeah.
And what is true tomorrow will not be true, or what is true today won't be true tomorrow necessarily.
Sure.
And, which is interesting given the next one, Canada.
An abstraction.
Next one, gender.
If it wasn't for gender, I don't think I would have my livelihood. But I think most people, I think gender is fantastic, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's just a way that we make meaning and make joy and make pleasure and make complexity and make things to think about. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I love it, and I want to see it not weaponized so much.
Next one is gender en français. No, just joking.
C'est difficile.
The next one is freedom.
C'est un défi. Freedom. I don't know. That word is just too tainted. It's too tainted by partisan politics. It doesn't mean, like, people bandy around terms like freedom of free speech and freedom of speech, and we don't even have that in Canada. Like, we don't. The only thing I think that word is doing now is doing partisan communication, unfortunately. It's kind of like the rainbow only means the LGBTQ communities.
Right.
And I'm not saying those are the same. I don't care. I'm happy the rainbow means that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying words come to have context and connotation in particular historical moments.
Sure.
And right now, the word freedom never comes into my lexicon because it is a part of a project that is not one that I believe to be useful. Not
to go down too far on this path, but is there a word that means what freedom should mean? Because I have the same feeling. I was in my 20s when the Iraq War happened, and we were
freedom fries,
right, and all this stuff, and
freedom toast,
right? I can't look at that word and appreciate the original freedom. Unbiased meaning of just.
I have to say, Beyonce has helped me to move that word back into my lexicon.
Does she have a
freedom? I can't lose. Freedom, got me loose. Mm-hmm. It's just like her freedom song.
Yeah,
that's a good song. That is putting it back into my lexicon. Freedom. I guess what I would say is self-determination. I think that might be part of what, and that just the idea that beyond these prescribed social rules, I get to figure out what's best for me. Like that right there is what you usually get down to when you scratch the surface of people who are making vociferous, like, anti-gender neutral pronoun arguments.
Weaponizing it.
Sure, just like, oh, well, actually, no. You just have to do what your genitals told you to do.
All right.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
What an amusing mental image.
Last one is power.
All I think about is all the imitations of Michel Foucault I used to do as a grad student.
Imitations of Michel Foucault.
Yes.
Like physical, like character.
Oh man, like voice, like strange voices and postures and lines and.
Can you just do one really quick?
No, because a lot of it rests on like a very strange French voice, and I feel like as a proud bilingual, I'm like my feelings about my nationality are tainted by colonialism, but like as a proud bilingual person who's a settler in Canada, I guess like bilingualism is part of Canada for me. So no, I won't do my Michel Foucault in the air.
But we know you can.
I can do a lot of things.
The mystery is all the more exciting. Like, do we actually have Dr. Peppers in front of us? Like, there's a lot of mystery to this. That was a good imitation of drinking a pop.
Right? I didn't know I could do that.
Lee,
thanks, Ben, for teaching me things about myself today.
You're welcome anytime. Lee, I really appreciate this conversation. Not only the depth of it, but how much fun we've had. And thank you for taking the time.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
To learn more about Lee Airton, go to the website whatonearthisgoingon.ca. There you can find all previous episodes as well as links to social media and email in order to get in touch with me and let me know what you think about this episode or any other, and to send me your suggestions for future guests or future topics to be discussed on this podcast. Your quote of the week is from Lee Airton and their book, Gender Your Guide. Don't aim for no mistakes. Aim for better mistakes. Thanks as always to our composer Andrea Wetstein for the wonderful music, and special thanks for this episode to Queen's University's Faculty of Education in Kingston, Ontario for giving us the space in which to record. Next week we're talking with Mark Solis, an alumnus of this podcast, about higher education. I'll see you then.